Hey, it's Sarah Pritchard, Confidence Coach for Women, and I'm excited to share with you today about to heal the things that trigger you, right? We all have our little triggers that ding, ding, ding show up and bother us at various times in our life. It can be multiple times in a day. It can be a couple of times a month. It can be when we're around certain people. It can be when we're listening to certain songs. It can be in certain spaces that remind us of certain memories, right? So anyway, we're going to get into that today. We're going to focus on breaking that curse, if you will. Not curse, because I feel like it's something that's recurring over and over again, and it never really shifts or change unless you actually do something about it. So for anybody that's new that is joining, I am Tara Pritchett, and I am a confidence coach for women. I love, love, love helping women heal, evolve, and grow. Thank you. So that they can manifest the life, love, and success that they desire and that they deserve. So I've been at this for, I would say at this point about 5 years. And I work with countless women through one-on-one coaching. Also through my coaching programs. I have about 5 programs that I offer. The one that is my favorite is Powerfully Positioned Woman Academy. But I'm looking forward to creating some new programs, right? I've been brainstorming just some new ideas around magnetism, around relationships, but also about doing inner healing work around our upbringing and our childhoods and our parents. And that came up for me about 2 months or so ago, right? And as a healer, right, which is what I consider myself, I'm not just a confidence coach. I'm also an intuitive, right? So I can feel things and hear things. But I also consider myself a healer, right? I feel like that is a gift that I have been given from God. And what we know about being a healer of any kind is that the healer has to heal, right? And that the healer cannot be perfect, right? And I don't pose myself to be perfect. I'm not, on here with glitz and glam and making it seem like I have a perfect life, because I absolutely don't. I have a great life, but I don't have a perfect life, right? And part of my own journey constitutes me doing inner healing work on my own self, right? And usually when I do inner healing work on myself, and because I have my own coaches, I have my own work that I have to do. And as I go through processes, or when I complete processes, that's then when I feel like I'm comfortable enough and I'm confident enough and I'm ready enough. And I usually feel the call to then reveal and share those things to you, right? So God will first reveal, and then you have to move into the healing phase, right? So for me, that's something that's been revealed to me. And it's something that I feel like I want to move full force in. And on top of that, I've just been talking to women recently, whether it is a personal connection or professionally. And this idea that as grown women, we struggle with certain issues and we struggle with certain things. As people are talking and sharing, I can easily pinpoint things and how they've been built and how they've evolved over time from when they were little girls, right? And from when they were children, or when they were teenagers, or from their upbringing, or from their mom, or from their dad, right? And then I also have to think about my own upbringing, right? Even though I have a great life, I always say that no one is exempt from having to deal with issues that occurred prior to now. Even if you had a good childhood and you had an amazing mom or an amazing dad, there are still things that you have to deal with that could be interfering with where you are right now. And this is not to blame or shame or guilt our parents or our guardians, right, for what it is that they've done. It's more so for our own healing. It's more so for our own selves, right? So the more that I do this type of work on my own self, the more it pushes me to want to do this type of work that I get to share out to you. Hey, that I get to share out to you, right? And when we think about something like our triggers, oftentimes when we're around certain people, we can get triggered by stuff, right? So if you're around your mom and she says a certain thing, it automatically triggers a certain response. Hey, it automatically triggers a certain response in you. I know it does for me. Whenever my mom says certain stuff, I automatically get triggered, right? And I know oftentimes for me, like I get very silent, or I shut down, or I go to, if we're in the same space, I might go to a different part of that space, go to a different out shopping, I might go to a different part of that store, right? Because that is my trigger and that's my coping mechanism that I've used, right? In order to deal with that certain situation, right? But for you, it could be a coworker, right? I got a coworker, she be triggering, right? And this year I've been really learning how do I handle that, or else it becomes a curse. And every single time that person does something, we're impacted by it. It affects us and it throws your whole day off, or it prevents you from moving forward in your life. Yeah, soul ties is also a great topic as well. That I know I covered last year, but I probably should cover again soon. I've really been wanting to do a new course on singleness and dating, mating, and relating, and soul ties was one of the topics that I had written down to cover in more depth. But also triggers, because triggers are also still connected back to dating and relating and mating as well. And again, a lot of our triggers, the reason why triggers are so important, because triggers are really the gateway, right? So where that little, I want to say like that little crack, right? Because you think about something that's all nice and shiny and perfect, or else at least that's the type of life we think we're going to have. And we don't want something that has little cracks in it, or there's a little nick in it. We don't really want that, right? But really those little cracks or those little things are really the opening and the gateway for our healing. It's really the gateway for us to heal, to evolve, and to grow. And even those soul ties that we have with people is really the gateway for us to heal, to evolve, and to grow, right? Because I had a soul tie in my life before, and even once I remove myself from that relationship, I would still get triggered by certain things that I would hear or I would see that's associated with that person's culture, or that's just associated with something that I connected to that person. So it took me to do a lot of very deep inner healing work in order for me to shift and move out of that, right? Because triggers can come up from, again, like I said, all different types of places. And triggers can be positive, but they can also be negative, right? In this video, I'm really more so talking about the negative ones, right? But you can also create a life where you set up confidence triggers, right? So any woman who's taken my Unleash Your Fears program, so that was really like the very first program I created back in 2016. I'm lying, that was my second program that I created back in 2016. And once you got to the end of that program, I had a module that was all about how you basically set your life up to have positive confidence triggers wherever you go. Right. And I probably have a little bit of that also inside of my Powerfully Positioned Woman Academy, but I don't think I have it as much. But it was more so just like, say, the way that you set up your bedroom or you set up your office at work, you constantly have confidence triggers there to remind you of your confidence or your power or your worth. So you might have little signs up, right? I got one right here. So remember, there are no mistakes, only lessons, right? So this is just an example of one. I have some at my job too, but I have them all over, right? So I consider things like this, these are confidence triggers. So, you know, whenever I'm in my bedroom, in my office, at work, whenever I work with teen girls, I'm always constantly setting up these confidence triggers. So a lot of people come and say, oh, that's so cute, or that's so pretty. But unconsciously, it is unconsciously triggering you to be in a certain mindset or to be in a certain mood. Okay, no. It's constantly triggering you to be in a certain way. The same is true as what do you have on your screensaver on your phone. That can be used as a confidence trigger. I had one coach, she went so far as she would take her affirmations, type them up, which I believe I mentioned in my book as well. And then she would put them in like a little plastic cover, and then she would even put them in the shower so that she's constantly being triggered in a positive way. So it's almost like setting a foundation, right? And that's why I always teach whatever woman I connect with, I always trying to get you into the habit of having a daily confidence routine or a daily ritual that you do that's building a foundation, because triggers are going to come at you left and right, and you have to know how to handle those things, right? So that if a setback occurs, your coworker says something crazy out of her mouth or his mouth, or they do something that you don't like, or you're triggered by something your dad says, and then it takes you all the way back to when you were 6 years old and he said X, Y, and Z, and it's like, oh my God, he's doing that thing again, and it's bothering you, right? You're not going to be as knocked off, right? If you already have a solid foundation and you've already set your life up to have those confidence triggers kind of around you at all times, right? So having the positivity that's around you and surrounding you is super important as you begin or continue the journey to self-love, to healing your triggers, to working through soul ties, or whatever it is that you find yourself needing to work on. Now, when it comes to those negative triggers, it's super important that you see those as, like I said, the gateway to allowing yourself to dig a little bit deeper, right? So if your mom or your dad or your sibling or a close friend, your childhood friend that you had growing up, your child, right? Whoever, your boss, if somebody that's really close to you is constantly triggering certain parts of you, then that's something that you need to deeply heal and something that you really deeply need to connect to. And I want to give you the steps that you can take so that you can move through this process, right? So if you have pen and paper. If you have pen and paper, now would be the time to grab that. If you wanted to take some notes, in the event that you want to go back and do some of this work on yourself, you are more than willing to do so, right? So the first thing that I would recommend that you do is identify what those triggers are, right? And I would advise you to take out a piece of paper or take out a journal and write those down, right? When I am around, my father, what things are being triggered? When I'm around my mother, what things are being triggered, right? And again, it could be positive and negative. When you're with your mom, you can feel really, really safe. But then you can also at the same time, feel like you're being judged at the same time. So you might feel safe in her presence because she always covered you, protected you, made sure you had everything you would have thought of and imagined. But at the same time, the flip side of that, you could have also felt very judged by her because she wanted you to be super perfect and always on point, right? So in my last live, I talked about the movie Happily Ever After, right? So the main character in there, her mom was such a perfectionist. So I'm sure she felt safe and she felt okay because she had this grand, beautiful life. But on the flip side of that, she was stuck in this perfectionism mode. So she would get triggered by that when somebody would say something about her hair. So for her, her hair was her trigger. So when somebody said, "Oh, when are you going to straighten your hair?" that triggered her, right? That also used to trigger me. A while ago. That used to trigger me a couple of years ago. So that was the trigger for her, right? So it could be positive and it could be negative. So I really encourage you to do it, especially with your family members, especially the ones that you're around often, right? Because our family plays a huge, gigantic role in who we are. And before we were grown as adult women, we were little girls, right? And when we're little girls, that's oftentimes when we are unconsciously picking up on things that might trigger us now. So usually around, I would say after about 6 years old, when you're like fully conscious of a lot of stuff. Obviously things could have happened prior to that, but after about 6 years old, you can be pretty conscious of certain things that were said or done around you or that even happened to you, all the way up until this point that could be helpful in you identifying what your triggers are that may have occurred with those family members up until this point, okay? And when you think about that, I also want you to write down what pain or hurt, like what feeling comes to you, right? So don't just identify what the trigger is, but what feeling or emotion or pain or hurt is coming up for you when you think about especially those negative triggers, right? Because the positive ones are usually okay for the most part. They're not really something that needs to be healed unless it's something that's preventing you or blocking you from going to your next level. So if you feel so safe that you want to be in your comfort zone all the time, and maybe your mom never said you had to be a risk taker. Maybe she let you give up easily. So maybe you do feel safe. But at the same time, it prevents you from taking a leap in your career. It prevents you from being vulnerable in a relationship. It prevents you from doing something else. Then perhaps that's something that you actually need to explore a little bit deeper. So I want you to think about, again, not only what the trigger is, but what is the pain or the feeling that's attached to it. Because a lot of times, especially when we're little girls, if it's something we don't like, we don't necessarily want to feel what that pain feels like because it's way easier to gloss it over and keep it moving. So again, think about what does that pain feel like, okay? Then the next thing that I want you to think about is what would the little girl in you, right? What would the little girl in you, what would she want to say, right, in that moment when she feels that trigger or feels that pain? So say you were, I don't know, this is just an example. So you were 10 years old, right? And something occurred and maybe your dad was always very hard on you and he always was yelling at you, but you just kind of I mean, you obviously took it because you had to, right? You and your siblings, or if it's just you, depending on your upbringing. And he's always constantly harsh on you. Obviously, maybe now in present day, right? So you will write down what triggers you. Maybe if you ever see a man yelling, or if you're watching a movie and you constantly kind of see a man yelling or getting angry, maybe that triggers you in a negative way, right? Because it reminds you back of your dad, right? So then you will also write down the pain that you feel that's associated with it. And maybe you feel like you are, unloved or not heard, right? You feel like my dad didn't hear me, or my dad didn't accept me, or my dad didn't allow me to really be me, because he's always yelling because he wants me to do things his way. So then that becomes a new issue for you that you then have to deal with, right? But my second thing was, what would the little girl in you want to say, right? Perhaps in that moment, while your dad was yelling, you didn't have an opportunity to speak back because you're a child, right? You don't have the opportunity. And now he's been doing it for so long, you're like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do with this? He an old head now, right? He's probably not going to change no matter what I say, but that's not necessarily true. So I would encourage you to think about what you would want to say back to him. Maybe you want to say, Dad, I recognize that you're angry. I recognize that you're upset, but you are really bothering me with the yelling, or you're really scaring me with your yelling. Right? So think about, what is it that you, as the little girl, what would she want to say? Because a lot of times, as I mentioned before, we are operating and living our lives and dealing with our finances. We are dealing with our relationships and our partners like that 8-year-old that's being yelled at. And we don't feel seen. We don't feel heard. We don't feel loved. We don't feel comfortable. We don't feel safe. We don't feel like we're enough. And then we take all of that unconsciously on the inside, and we go out into the world and we're like, oh, I'm going to get a degree, and I'm going to have this life, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And we're all excited and all happy. And then we run into brick walls, and we're like, and you're like, on the surface, I have a good job, I'm a good person, I volunteer, I help out, I'm beautiful, I'm this, I'm that, on the surface. But then why is it that the men I attract are bums? I had this conversation this weekend at a dinner. This was a whole conversation at the table. My friend was saying how she just constantly attracts bums all the time. I wish she would jump on here. And she was just saying that when she just moved to a new place, that there will be a guy, and he'll be all dressed up and all nice and smelling good and all professional, and they never ever look her way. She was like, when I walked by this whole little strip, all these different homeless men, they was broke down, and they all were trying to talk to me. And she was like, it never fails. Wherever I go, it's like I have a vibe out there. And I was like, oh. But on the surface, smart, beautiful, gorgeous, talented, degrees, great, like everything, car, clothes, all of it. And she's like, I don't understand, because the guy at Walmart will be checking for me, but the guy at Wall Street will not, right? And again, there's something unconsciously going on. 9 times out of 10, it is connected back to upbringing, or it is connected back to her perceptions of men. And I've had conversations with her in the past about men, and her perceptions in the past have been very, very negative, right? Because she's had these negative experiences. Her perception of men is like all the way, like, I don't really know. All men are this, or I don't know if they're capable of that, or why should I have to do, all this inner healing work? What is he doing? Like, it gets into a very negative vibe, right? But we're not here to blame others or to look at what someone else is doing. We're not here to say, okay, Dad, go do your inner healing work, or okay, to your partner, go do your work. No, we're not necessarily saying that, because what it is, as a fierce, confident, and powerful woman, we know that when we do the work on our own selves to heal, to evolve, and to grow, that we are only going to attract and to tolerate people in our lives who are also vibing at that level. When somebody no longer vibrates at our level, that's when it's normally time for us to go and to move on, right? That's how you get to a breakup. That's how you get the time, like, I need to get into a new job, because you feel like my time here has been done, right? This has been a cycle of completion. I'm done. I'm ready for a new beginning, right? And when every time your vibe shifts, that's what happens, right? So you are not confined to stay in a certain place, but oftentimes when you don't heal your triggers, you will oftentimes feel as though you are stuck at a certain place and you cannot move forward in the way that you want to, because you're still stuck as that 8-year-old with your dad yelling at you, and you don't know how to move forward. And then we get into, other darker spaces and places when we don't have the right outlets and opportunities and tools and resources to heal and evolve those spaces and those places. Because in order for you to come up higher and in order for you to raise your vibe, you first got to go lower and you got to get into those dark spaces. So you got to not only just think about the triggers, but think about how that made you feel. What would you have wanted to yell back to your dad? What would you have wanted to say to your mom if she's trying to push you to be the perfect one? Or what would you want to yell back when you feel like you're the one that had to take over the whole entire family when you were 13 or 14 because X, Y, and Z happened? What would you, be honest, what would you want to say? Because 9 times out of 10, you probably haven't had, and this goes into my number 3, the proper outlet and opportunity to release and express how you actually really feel to the people that actually trigger you. Right? That's probably part of it. You haven't had the opportunity because you don't want to be vulnerable. You're afraid of what their reaction might be. You're afraid of what that other person might say. Like if you actually did go tell your dad, maybe you're afraid he might shut you down, or if you go say something to your mom, or even if you go say something to your sibling who you felt as though always had a competition, or you always felt as though they were treated better or they was treated differently, or you saw them in a different way. There's also inner healing work in that, doing work around siblings, not just parents, but also around friendships and relationships, right? There's so many relationships that we have in our life. So that brings me up to number 3. Once you think about what you have wanted to say, then the third thing is for you to actually to express that thing to that person that is triggering you. So if it is your mom, it's like it's time for you to have a conversation. If it's your dad, it's time to have a conversation. And if that seems like it's too scary, right, then I would encourage you to write it down first, right? Maybe you're like, I don't know, I'm unsure, I'm afraid. Then write down what you would say. So, Mom, I love you. You know I love you. However, when I was a little girl, I felt as though X, Y, and Z. Right? Or Dad, when I was a little girl, I felt as though you were very distant. You were not showing up for me in the way that I needed to. Yet now that I'm an adult, I feel as though you're constantly reaching out to me for things that pertain to you, but you never reach out to me for things that necessarily pertain to me. And that does not make me feel good. Right? So again, it's having that conversation with that person, that coworker, that sibling, or that's, again, putting pen to paper and beginning that process on paper so that you're getting it from inside of here unconsciously and you're making super conscious and clear, right? The reason why a lot of us have things that are unhealed is because they unconsciously run our lives and they're connected to patterns because they're so deeply ingrained in our beliefs. So when we're triggered, we feel it like, ooh. Right? So it's about having those conversations, again, whether it's in person and speaking your truth, right? This whole entire process is about truth and it's about honesty, right? And as long as you are afraid or in denial or resisting, right? What you resist, I don't know why it keeps asking me to tag people in this video. So what you resist will persist. So if it's something you know that you probably should have said before or that you need to say, then now would be the time, right, to do so, right? Because how you related to your parent or guardian or siblings or that coworker or that friend while you were growing up or even while you've been at this job for the last 10 years, those things have a great impact on how you relate to other things as well in life. So how you relate to your mom, that translates into your female friendships and your connections with other people. How you relate and think about your dad connects to the ways in which you think about men and relationships, right? So it is imperative, it is crucial that you learn how to work through and heal and to evolve those things that trigger you, or that you heal and evolve those things that come up for you that don't always feel good, that don't always make you feel like you are the most amazing, beautiful woman in the world. The key is getting to the root of allowing the other person to know that this is what I felt as a little girl. Because what is it doing? It's allowing you to bring attention and awareness to something that kind of has been on the hush or on the low, or that you've been carrying around for like the last 20, 30, 40 years. And that nobody really even realizes that you're carrying, right? Because a lot of things we're carrying, we're not really meant to carry, but also it might not have been up to you to have to carry it, but it's up to you to be able to release, that thing from yourself, because most importantly, you want to be free. Most importantly, you want to clear up space. Most importantly, you want to be healed, right? And when you're healed, we all know that that makes the world a better place, but that also makes it easier for you to live, to laugh, to love, and to get closer to your God-given purpose, but also to get closer to your God-given destiny, right? And all of these things that are happening, those triggers, as I said earlier, they are the gateway, they are the key. And when we have certain triggers, because we all don't have the same triggers. And when we have certain triggers, also realize not only are they the gateway to our healing, but they're also usually the gateway to our purpose, right? Because my triggers are going to be different from yours. Your experiences with your parents are going to be different from mine. And just your life in general is going to be different. But where it is that you feel like you're about to break, or that you're being triggered, or that things hurt, or there's pain, is 9 times out of 10 where God is setting you up for your destiny to be on purpose. So also thinking about, how do these triggers, how do those things connect back to what I feel like I might be called to do in this world, right? As I mentioned at the start of this, the reason why I love doing this work is because I'm a healer. The healer must heal themselves. The healer must be perfect. And when I mentioned earlier, and I gave you that scenario about the dad scenario, that really would be me talking to my own dad. But you didn't know that because I didn't say that. But that's why it was easy for me to flow, because that is a conversation that I now, like, I'm telling you, you need to do it. I'm never going to tell you to do something that I'm not going to do. And I tell my students that as well. So that's a conversation that I now realize just recently that I need to have with my own dad. That I need to when next time I talk to him, because it's not that often, but I need to let him know, right, that there's a lot of distance oftentimes. And I didn't even necessarily realize it was a trigger, because I think oftentimes I might put him on a pedestal in a different way compared to my mom, because I'm around my mom like all the time, but I'm not around him as often. So it's easier for me to do that because I'm not constantly in his presence, where he's constantly able to show me all the fullness of himself. But I know that being distant and then popping up, like, that's really not going to fly for the rest of my life, right? So it's just a matter of me having that conversation. But as I took you through the process, identifying what that trigger is, right? So that's him being distant, and then you pop up when you want something, or want me to do something for you. Okay, but you don't say, oh, hey, how you doing? How's life? No, you are like, oh, well, did you do X, Y, and Z for me? What? Right? So then that is, now I'm realizing, becoming conscious of, that is a trigger for me. Right? And that's not something that just started now. That started when I was younger. Right? So, and it's like, I got to take myself back and be like, this is not a new thing. But it's new as in I'm going to respond and act differently, right? Because now I need to actually come up and say what I need to say to you, so that I can feel free and that I can be healed. So I can let you know how the little girl in me felt, and now how the grown woman in me is feeling. And guess what? It's not going to continue, because I'm going to step up and I'm going to do something different about this particular situation. So again, I want you to start thinking about, what are the triggers, especially the negative ones, and even the positive ones that seem positive on the surface, but if you dig a little bit deeper, could be impacting you negatively, keeping you stuck, keeping you bitter, resentful, angry, guilty, ashamed, unwanted, unheard, unloved, right? There's a lot of words there, right? Figure out what your words are. Figure out how you're being triggered. Okay? And then you need to figure out what pain or feeling comes up when you think about those triggers. Then think about, what would you have said if you could have, as that little girl, or even if you're that 20-year-old girl when that thing happened. What would you have liked to say in that moment? And then refine that and reshape that for number 3. Sorry, I feel like there's something in my eye. To how you want to actually express and initiate a conversation, either in person, over the phone, or even through journaling with that individual, to start expressing your truth and the honesty of who you are, and say, as a little girl, this is how I felt. And I promise you, it will allow you the opportunity to lift the weight off of you when you stop hiding and keeping things within yourself, and you begin the process. And the beauty of doing this with people that trigger you is that if you struggle with vulnerability, because a lot of my clients often do, if you struggle with really showing up and being seen or being heard, or really opening up to somebody and really trusting somebody, this begins the process. Because again, it's all about truth and honesty. And your very first teachers, your parents or your guardians. Well, even if your parents are deceased, you can still do the same work. So obviously maybe you can't express it to them, but you can still write these things out to them. You can even go to, if they have a gravesite, you can even go there and sit there for a while and share how you feel, right? Ultimately, you just want to get to a place of peace. If someone else raised you, that's not your parents, or you grew up with like a very close cousin that was more like a sibling, and you felt like there was something there that triggers, utilize that person as well for this journey. No one is exempt, right? If they impact you, if you can feel it, then guess what? And something is revealed, then you might need to heal it. So think about all those different people who might trigger those things so that you can shift how you relate to them moving forward. Because again, the way you relate to your host family or your closest immediate family and friends dictates a lot of things about yourself and about your life, right? So we want to make sure that we're in control of that. And that things are unconsciously flowing and going that we feel like we don't have control over, or that we feel like we have to be angry, resentful, or mad about all the time. Okay, so I hope that you have found this to be helpful. I hope you're able to break the curse and to heal the triggers. If you're interested in going deeper, I hope that you have signed up for my Break Every Chain, Heal the Inner Little Girl Challenge. We will be going deeper into these concepts as well as others I've shared recently revolving around doing this type of inner healing work around your little girl that I feel like is inside of you and that needs to be healed. She needs to be loved. She needs to be nurtured. She needs to be seen. She needs to be heard. All the things I mentioned earlier that you might not have felt. The purpose of the challenge is to jumpstart you, to give her, right, to acknowledge her, to love on her, to give her those things so that you can shift once the little you inside of you is shifted, the big you, the current you, is going to feel so much different and so much more happier and so much more free to live, to laugh, to love, to be, to do, to have, because you're not going to be weighed down by these triggers. You're not going to be weighed down by, again, the little roles that you may have taken on growing up in order for you to feel like you were safe or okay in your family. Or if you didn't feel like you were saved or included or loved or whatever the case may be, it's time for you to shift that, right? So this is a free 5-day challenge. You can go to bit.ly/fiercebreak so that you can sign up and so that you can join us so that we can continue this work. I will go live every day. That there will also be worksheets and assignments and a lesson every single day. So you have the opportunity to unpack these things in a much more deeper way, to look at these triggers, I'll examine them more closely, look at the role that you were playing growing up or that you might continue to play in your family and how that impacts you as a grown woman, right? It's time for you to heal. It's time for you to evolve. It's time to grow, but it's also time to relate to and understand your upbringing, your childhood, and also your parent or guardian and siblings and family in a better way so that you can live a better life, right? So hopefully that makes sense. Again, I hope that you have enjoyed. If you're catching a replay, please make sure you are leaving comments. If we haven't already did a Fierce Clarity Breakthrough session, you can also still sign up for those as well at bit.ly/chattara. Again, if you want to sign up for the challenge, you should be able to see the link that is attached here. I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.